All right, everybody, welcome to our next session. I think we're going to get started. Our next speaker is going to join us online, Sue Milton. She's with SAON and will be presenting a talk on restoration challenges in arid ecosystems. So welcome, Sue, over to you.
In the southern Karoo. Here I first present some evidence for the long duration of grazing and other forms of damage caused to the Karoo, and then I discuss the restoration trials that we've carried out, both returning palatable plant species and revegetating bare ground. There are two major types of changes that I've noticed. The first one is the change of a mixed vegetation to dominance by unpalatable shrubs, long-lived shrubs, and this is driven mainly by grazing. Then there's the denudation of the landscape, the loss of all plants and some of the processes such as seewilkies and termites from the landscape. Here's some evidence of the longevity of vegetation change. The slide from the drone view shows a neighboring farm which still carries sheep. And in the foreground is another farm, which is actually Volva Nature Reserve, which has not been used for sheep grazing for 60 years. You can see in the inset that the ungrazed farm looks a lot worse than the currently grazed farm. And this is probably because there was a stock post on that north-facing hill slope way back around the mid-1800s. Here's a circular patch where there was once a cocoon kraal, a kraal of indigenous herders who probably kept fat-tailed sheep there as late as the mid-1800s or perhaps the early 1800s. That kraal remains bare today. There's been no recovery of vegetation whatsoever, probably because it's a deflation hollow and there are no plants there or brushwood to catch any seeds coming from the surrounding landscape. Moreover, the topsoil, which was sand, has blown away, leaving a very hard subsoil. Now I will talk about the restoration trials we have done and our findings. The first set of trials relates to attempts to change vegetation composition by removing less palatable plants and adding seeds of more palatable plants. This is a trial done in 1996 where Tyronia pallens, a poisonous plant, dominated area, was hand-pulled to reduce the density of Tyronia pallens, and in another strip, 20 meters wide, it was ripped by a ripper to reduce the density of Tyronia pallens. Then these strips were oversown with seeds of a palatable plant, Osteospermum sinuatum. By 2002, you can see that the ripped area had far more flowering and a higher diversity of vegetation than the control unripped area. There had been release from competition for many plant species, including the palatable species and the unpalatable species. However, composition was generally better where ripping had taken place than where it had not taken place. We repeated exactly the same experiment in an area dominated by kraalbos, Gallenia africana. In this case, there was no improvement in the composition of the veld. Indeed, what happened is the density of Gallenia africana, which has very small seeds, increased greatly This is because I think as competition from established gallinias was reduced by ripping, so millions of seeds germinated from the soil seed bank on the sandy soil. Now I'm going to focus on bare ground revegetation, first for sandy deep soils and then for clay soils. The first trials were carried out in 2016 on bare sandy soils. The trials were done by a large group, 50 people, of Sarsveld students who built little fences under instruction by Ken Coetzee and brush packed the area, as well as digging catchments or small hollows to trap water. And then they were oversown with a great variety of seeds from the local area. 8 years later, you can see that vegetation had established in the hollows and along the brush fences. So the lesson we learned from this is that this approach, using a mixture of brush packing and hollows on sandy soils, is very effective. Near Loxton, in collaboration with WWF, many trials were carried out using reseeding and replanting in hollows among brush fences. You can see here that after heavy rains, the hollows began to silt up and the clay content of the soil was so high that as they dried out, the hollows cracked. Moreover, when it rained, the hollows retained water and were waterlogged for many, many days, killing some of the planted plants. The lesson learned from this trial was that it's far more challenging to work on clay soils than on sandy or silty soils. It's very important to select appropriate halophytes, which in the Loxton area also need to be frost resistant. Hollows can drown any plants planted at the bottom of the hollow, so it's much more effective to plant the plants on the wall of the hollow. And then finally, one should use spring and autumn for planting, as the summer is too hot and the winter too. Now we'll move on to trials on skeletal soils. On this very, very bare soil, 25 students from Sarsveld under Ken Coetzee's direction in 2017 packed brush to try and trap seeds and get vegetation back. By 2023, almost nothing had happened at all except for colonization by a few annuals. That was in the brush packing. Where hollows were dug in the same year, the hollows became waterlogged after rain. And 7.5 years later, although a few plants had indeed established in the hollows, results were very disappointing. I therefore tried using seeds that were very small, the seeds of Russia spinosa, the doringvee or steekvee. I scattered the capsules over the soil surface in 2024, and a month later, after good winter or autumn rains, I counted the seedlings. There were many thousands of seedlings. And a year later, many of these had established and were at the 4-leaf stage. Now here's a meta-analysis of many trials done in the Southern Karoo by myself with students and colleagues. And this is really what I think the major outcomes were. Brush packing was nearly always successful, however, not successful when it was at high density or did not make good contact with the soil surface. Reseeding was generally successful. However, the seeds had to be appropriate for the soil texture and for the soil salinity. And of course, they had to be local species. Hollows worked well except on clay soils and stony soils that didn't drain. And hollows were not successful for Azoaceae, for the facies, because the seeds were too small and nearly always got drowned after rain. Planting plants is expensive. It's quite effective, particularly if the timing's good and the planting's done immediately before rain or if water is available. Watering of rehabilitated sites can give good results. However, excessive watering results in shallow-rooted plants that die once water's withheld. If you do nothing, you get no change. Adding of a lot of mulch, we find, can be positive and also negative. It's generally negative in the succulent karoo, as it decreases the chances of seeds of facies germinating because they're simply too small to germinate through a mulch layer. Ripping we found to be generally negative. It destroyed the remaining vegetation and tended to channel the water, causing water to run off along the furrows. Nitrogen addition generally led to very marked establishment of weedy species, particularly Salsa and Atriplex lindleyi, which outcompeted the indigenous plant sown as seed. And leaving livestock or game in the camp during the rehabilitation trials was always negative. The animals tended to concentrate on the patches where plants were germinating and led to their destruction. Here's just some photos showing you the rather negative effects of ripping, of dense mulching, and of leaving animals on the land during rehabilitation trials. Here's photos showing you the positive effects of hollows, so long as the drainage is not poor, the positive effects of brush packing, so long as there's not too much brush, too much so as to exclude light and seeds that come from elsewhere. In conclusion, one size certainly does not fit all cases of restoration in the Karoo, and we've got a very long way to go and lots of research still to do. Thank you.
Great, thanks for that talk. So our next speaker, let's just check Monelisi. Is that correct? From University of Fort Hare. Great. Monelisi, welcome. And I'll hand over to you. If you can just introduce yourself and your talk. Thanks.
Greetings, everyone. I am Makanya Monelisi. I'm going to give you a short presentation on effectiveness of integrated shrub management and restoration techniques on rehabilitating shrub-encroached rangelands of South Africa. Shrub encroachment is the major problem that threatens biodiversity and range productivity, and thus reduces the grazing capacity. Among other encroachers, Terrena incana has encroached vigorously in communal areas of the Eastern Cape. This shrub poses an adverse effect on herbaceous vegetation. Therefore, there is a need for restoration of these shrub encroached areas. The effective restoration techniques to restore the herbaceous vegetation is not known. Hence, we evaluated the integration of various shrub removal and restoration techniques to identify the most appropriate method to maximize the recovery of herbaceous vegetation. The study was conducted in communal rangelands of Keto village, which is located within the Ngqusho municipality. We firstly identified heavily encroached areas with at least 85% of Terronia in Kana cover for the experimental plots. The treatments were assigned randomly on the experimental plots, with each treatment replicated 3 times on the 2 slope aspect, which is the north and the south facing slope. The treatments were uprooting the shrub with its root system and applying or reseeding with grasses. Then the second one, it was uprooting without reseeding. The third one, it was cutting the shrub and reseeding. The fourth one, it was cutting only. Then the last one, it was no shrub removal or grass reseeding done on which acted as our control. The data for herbaceous plant cover, density, diversity, and species richness was collected a year after the treatment application. The analysis of variance was conducted to evaluate the fixed effects of restoration techniques and slope aspect. The mean separation was conducted using 2K's test at 95% confidence interval. Here are the pictures. Picture A shows the experimental plots before the treatment application. Then picture B shows the experimental plots during restoration. Then picture C shows the experimental plots after restoration. The study results show that all the restoration methods significantly increased the plant density, richness, and diversity in a comparable manner than the control, thus highlighting that Terronia incana is detrimental to the herbaceous layer, and the plant density, richness, and diversity can be enhanced without grass reseeding. On vegetative covers, the restoration method promoted the graminoid cover, but their effect was also influenced by the slope aspect. However, an opposite was true for the non-graminoid cover. The non-reseeded restoration plots in the south-facing slope had higher bare areas, therefore reseeding is needed. Overall, shrub clearing was beneficial in restoring the herbaceous plant density and diversity, regardless of the restoration methods. However, vegetation covers dependent on the shrub clearing method, reseeding, and the slope aspect. Thus, the decision on restoration of herbaceous vegetation should be informed by vegetation attribute of restoration priority. I would like to thank the Land Care Department and Mr. Tangi Tubelo from Doni Agricultural Research Institute. Then I would like to also thank GSSA for granting me an opportunity to present here my paper. Thank you.
Thanks very much. We don't have time for questions, but what we'll do is we'll probably run through the presentations in the session, and if we get a chance, then we'll have some quick questions after for all the presenters. And we'll catch up with Sue later. Our next speaker is Nobuntu Mapeyi. Welcome, thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Don't be surprised to see this topic because in the program it's different, but it's the same thing, but two organized in these slides that I'm gonna present. Why are we focusing on forage production? It's because there is a challenge of high unemployment rate among the youth in Eastern Cape, in the rural areas. And secondly, livestock farming is a demand in facing the livestock farming is high and widely spread, but there is a shortage of it. Thirdly, this forage production is underutilized, so we would like to promote and increase productivity and then address the problem of the farmers. We saw an opportunity of this forage as a green gold It's a fast-growing market due to livestock demand, and we've got existing suitable crops that are able to grow there, like oats, radish, lucerne, and some perennial grasses. We have a hope that since it's got multiple income streams, as hay, silage, grazings, and sales of bales, and hiring out of the land or planted pastures, it's gonna be an opportunity to the youth, and it's a low-tech enterprise which has not been expanded, and an entry level is very friendly. How to empower the agribusinesses amongst the youth in forage production? We had a challenge that the youth are job seekers, most of us. And then now we have to untie or change the mind that we must be job creators. So I believe that forage production could open that, and it requires minimum land to start. It can even be done in the communal lands. Practical training can be done in the community-based projects like field days, demonstration plots. It is gonna be able to happen, because even if you demonstrate in gardens, they can learn. It can build the agro skills for long-term food security. What are the businesses that need to be unpacked to the youth so that they understand how broad our pasture or pastoralism, as one of the speakers mentioned yesterday, or Monday, that it's an unclear sector that they don't enterprise, that they don't understand. I can make examples. For small-scale hay production, they can sell to livestock owners. They've got the existing market. They can also start businesses for seed multiplication, which is a niche. It's a niche market and have high returns. They can have grazing contracts where they can plant land and also hire out for the livestock owners to graze, and they get a fee for that. Agro-processing includes baling and packaging of resale, and draining and extension will be the priority of the project. The challenge is, we know that youth do not have land. And if we have a database for them to access funding and finance, we will also raise awareness more about the enterprise. And the youth-focused grants are required to assist in digital training and agri-platforms. Lastly, we can assist them, create jobs, feed livestock, regenerate rural economies, and invest in training. So let's invest in training, visibility for youth-led agribusinesses. It's a challenge for all of us. Thank you.
Thanks very much. So that brings us to the end of this session, which does give us some time for questions, which is great. So I've got a mic here, and there may be another roving mic, but let's just first see a show of hands. You would have heard the speakers. I'm hoping that Sue will be able to join us online, and we've got Monelisi and Nobuntu who are in the room, and so we can take a few questions. Thanks. I see a hand at the back, right at the back. Is there a mic? Thanks. That Debbie.
Hi, Sue. Debbie here. I was wondering if you used rooted cuttings to plant into the ground. And I understand it would be more labor intensive and expensive, but you then have a plant a small plant, it's not growing from seed. And then also if the basins were made smaller, that they don't flood to the same extent as the basin size you showed in your slides. Thanks.
Thanks for the question. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Yes, we've tried rooted cuttings, mainly of Pensy and Kana. So we take trays of 200 to the veld and we plant those in. All the plants that were planted in the Loxton experiment were osteospermums and turonias and saltbushes, atriplex grown in the Loxton area. And that does work, but it's very expensive and the labor is very time consuming in comparison to reseeding. So the position of the planting is very important, and so are follow-up rains, which in the Karoo are very unpredictable. And with reference to your size about the size of the hollow or basin, that's a tricky one because hollows fill up with silt over time and with dust, and sometimes mice and other animals dig in them and flatten them out within about a year. So because you can't predict when rain's going to fall in much of the most arid parts of the Karoo, a larger basin persists in the landscape for longer, for about 5 years, whereas a very small hollow usually gets filled up or dug up by animals within about a year. So it's a trade-off. If you're in a good rain year, a smaller hollow is probably better. But if you are in a long dry period, it might be better to have a larger hollow so that you don't have to redig it.
Great. Thanks, Sue. Thanks very much. I see we are actually running out of time. So the next session is due to start now at 25 past. So I saw there was one more hand. Maybe let's just take that one quick question, but if you can keep it quick, thanks.
Thank you. Sue, it's Lorraine speaking. Just another question on the reseeding. I just want to find out whether the seeds that have been sown, were they tested for germination before the time? Did you have any idea of what the germination capacity of the seeds were before they were sown? Thank you.
Some of the seeds that we use don't require any prep. So, for example, Osteospermum sinuatum can germinate at any time of the year and requires no preparation. It has almost zero dormancy, whereas some of the grasses, such as Stipagrostis, need to be aged for at least a year and then soaked before sown. We did those things, yes.
Great, thanks very much. Thanks, Sue.